Hey everyone, this is Brown I have Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Arak, Son of Thunder, issues 41 through 50. These issues make up the final arc of the series, and as far as final arcs go, it's something that I have mixed feelings on. Like many other series, Arak was a book that started off strong and had a good to great first 2 years, but sometime around its third year, I would say starting at issue 34, things started to take on a very rushed quality as far as the writing goes. And as a result, the book itself unraveled to an extent. And not to the point where I'd say that the book ever became bad, but it's just that, some good issues here and there aside, it struggled to meet the standards that had been set by the fantastic first 2 years. And the reason for this rushed quality in terms of the writing is because behind the scenes, the creative team had been informed by DC Comics that their book was going to be ended at issue 50, and so at a certain point, they tried to just I guess plow through as many stories that they could before the final issue. And the reason that this rushed approach is problematic in the instance of issues 41 through 50 is because as a final arc, you would expect for all the main plot threads to be wrapped up. You'd expect for the main characters to have fitting ends, but unfortunately, this is something that doesn't happen. And even though as an arc in and of itself that this is not a bad arc, even with the rush quality present, the arc literally ends. I mean, issue 50, the last issue of the series, literally ends on a cliffhanger. And because no other effort came to fruition to give the book, a solid ending, or I guess you could say a genuine ending, the book itself, the comic book of Arak, Son of Thunder, ends on a on a note that's somewhat unsatisfactory. Like I said, the arc itself is not a bad arc, but because it ended on a cliffhanger, and it was the last arc of the series, the it just it's a disappointment. But to be fair, this arc starts off strong, and case in point, Arak and his companions, they have a run-in with the sorceress Angelica of White Cathay, who's been a persistent foe of them, for some time. And she ends up banishing Valda the Iron Maiden and Satyricus the Last of the Satyrs into the underworld. And for their freedom, she forces Arak to go on this one-man suicidal quest for this ingredient called the Herb of Eternal Life. And the reason that she's wanting this herb is because this whole time she's actually been in league with the Serpent People, who, if you'll recall, were the mortal enemies of Arak's people. And regardless of how much power and wisdom of the dark arts that they've given Angelica, they've withheld just enough to where, as powerful as she is, she's still under their thrall. And so Angelica is wanting to use this herb to live forever so she can have the time to gain and means to gain the knowledge and power to where if she's not more powerful than the Serpent People, at the very least she'll be powerful enough to break away from them and be her own agent with her own agenda, which wouldn't be a problem except for the fact that she has made it clear that she has nothing good intended for the world at large once she gets her hands on this herb. And so Arak does, against all odds, find the herb, but unfortunately for Angelica, he decides that nope, someone like you does not deserve to live forever. And so through some form of divine guidance, Arak is able to take a detour into the underworld and free Valda and Satyricus from the throngs of the dead as they're being judged. by the king and queen of the underworld. But Arak's struggle to save his companions actually catches the eye of one of the judges of the dead, a certain Gilgamesh from mythology, who he himself had been on a similar quest aeons ago for the herb of eternal life, so that he could save a companion of his own from the netherworld. And so this struggle actually manages to break Gilgamesh out of his stupor, and Arak and his companions find themselves fighting side by side with Gilgamesh, to break through the land of the dead and into the world of the living. And this last bit of heroism is successful on Gilgamesh's part. And once he gets to the world of the living and says his farewells to Arak and his companions, he turns to dust, free to go on to the afterlife, free of the netherworld. And so, to be sure, these issues, this particular plot, is actually very well done, and it's a reminder of just how good the creative team could be, as well as how good the book itself could be. But then you have issues 44, 45, and 46, which all, I guess you could say, all three really came across as filler issues. And to be fair, 44 and 45, I mean, they still felt like they were a part of Arak's world, but it's just that the antagonists in question, the antagonists in these particular issues, this cult in issue 44, there's Arak and his companions end up running afoul of the cult of Shiva, and which in turn is run by this maddened priest who ends up becoming sort of this demonic form, this I guess you could say a demonic form of Shiva, and Arak is forced to go up against a sort of man-god hybrid, as well as the demented cult that's under his thrall. And so that's one and done. Issue 45, Alcinde, who is abducted by this fairy-like girl, this green, fairy-like girl, and it turns out that while she seems to genuinely have an attraction to him, there's more to her than meets the eye, because it turns out that on the island that she lives on, her and her people, while they are fairy-like creatures, they are more insectoid than, say, mortal, because at a certain point they turn into these sort of man-eating snake-like insects. And so Arak and co have to save Alcinde from her, but Alcinde is naturally heartbroken at this turn of events, because he fell in love with this girl before she became this insect monster. And that in itself, wasn't, a bad story. It's just that you felt like they could have done more with it, as well as, the storyline with the cult of Shiva. I mean, both of those are one and done in, one issue each. But you feel like if they'd had more time, the creative team had more time, they could have stretched out both stories for an extra issue. Because, I mean, they were always really good at that, in issues prior. Like when it came to, say, mythology and folklore of other cultures, they were good at, giving their own spin on it and, developing it. But because, in the case of, the cult of Shiva in issue 44, being done in one issue, it just comes across as monster of the week that happens to be named Shiva, as opposed to, say, a couple of issues, going into the lore and mythology within this setting. As far as issue 45 with the fairy-like creature, I was disappointed in that one because, on one hand, the artwork was beautiful, but at the same time, it's just that the the one and done monster of the week development of this issue, it was a letdown. And it could have given some development to Alcine, who I never really got to dig as a character. I mean, he always came across as whiny and annoying, which, I mean, I understand why he's constantly upset because his family's dead, but at the same time it's just like they never really did a good job of making him into a character that you could pull for. So if they had done this particular story for an extra issue or so, I mean, I think that it would have been an interesting say coming of age story for him, away from Arak's companions, and with this woman who doesn't speak his language but clearly has an attraction for him, and the two of them could have been. It would have been interesting to see if the two of them had been like an item of some sort. Like if once he saw her, her alternate form, would he have still loved her? Mind you, he's a teenager, but still. But because they do, they make it into a typical monster of the week, story. You don't really get any of that, and so that was kind of a been there, done that, as it actually was, as the issue itself actually was. Also, issue 45 is when writers Roy and Dan Thomas switch from writing the actual issues and just they stick to coming up with the plots. And from issue 45 to issue let's see. Yeah, 45 to issue 50, a writer by the name of R.J.M. Lofficer took over the scripting. So Roy and Dan Thomas were still involved, but it wasn't them coming up with the actual, dialogue. It was someone else. And so that, adds even further to, this sort of this sort of jarring feel, alongside the, rushed development. But, I guess you could say, as far as the filler issues go, the worst one is issue 46, in which basically consists of Arak and his companions, swapping stories. But of course, the main point is Arak's story, and he tells of a time in which he supposedly went to Valhalla, courtesy of the Valkyrie, and ended up meeting, amongst other people, Thor. And so this actually could have been a good story, you say as a standalone story, but the problem is at this point in the series, I mean, we only have, after 46, we've only got 4 more issues to go, and so far the main plot threads haven't been wrapped up yet. What are you doing here? and also. You feel like this particular issue might have been better off earlier in the series, because the thing is, Arak, it had been established that, the one time Arak had legitimately gone to, some form of the afterlife was in issue 33, in which, he had died and met his, father, the thunder god of his tribe. And so he had certainly had interactions with denizens from various forms of the spirit worlds, but he had never actually gone into say what could pass for heaven or hell prior to this, or I should say heaven, because he'd definitely gone through some form of hell. Excuse me. But because of when this book is placed, or because of when issue 46 is placed in the series, it's difficult to figure out, okay, did this actually happen? Because this would contradict a whole bunch of the storytelling that had taken place prior to this issue, at least as far as Arak's interactions with the gods are concerned. But on the other hand, if you take it as just Arak telling a tall tale, it's not bad. But the main problem of this book is that, or of this issue, is that it's literally filler. I mean, yes, it's done by the main creative team, but I mean, it literally is an obstacle that's in the way of the last few issues of the series. And so I really feel like that this issue would have been better if it had been earlier in the series. If, say, Arak and his companions were at a tavern somewhere, like they often were back then, just telling stories. I mean, that would have worked better. And there could have been okay, is he telling the truth or not? A little bit of ambiguity. Like, they could have done that, but, as it is, it's just very awkwardly placed filler. Or if they had done another Arak annual, I mean, this could have been, one and done backup story. But because of its placement in the series, yeah, it's just like, okay, what are you doing here? Out, scram. So, issue 47 has the return of Arak's frenemy, the Viking Haakon, who we last saw parting ways with Arak and his companions in issue 25 to, go his own way. So, it's a welcome return for, that particular character, because he was one of those affably evil types. That was, fun to see his interactions with Arak and his crew. But unfortunately, we don't really get as much time with him as we would like, because he's actually bumped off in a rather unceremonious way, because at the point that they meet him, Arak and his companions, they're in China, actually, and they end up meeting, amongst other people, Mulan, which that in itself is an interesting plot development, but because of how rushed things are, I mean, we get an abbreviated, I guess you could say, an abbreviated turn of events as to how she is initially fighting with Arak and his companions before joining forces with them, along with Haakon, against this dragon that's plaguing the ships of China. And it turns out that this dragon was brought on by Angelica, who has reared her pretty head again, and what ends up happening is both Haakon and Mulan end up getting killed in a rather explosive accident, that's partially caused by this, dragon. And so, you have two interesting characters who are, either introduced or brought back, only to just be, bumped off just like that, which was kind of a letdown. But I will say, though, that I did like how, when Arak and Angelica, have their final confrontation with one another, there's this really cool moment where, basically, the dragon that she had been using is countered by this Chinese wizard, who he has all these toys and artifacts, but he's able to use this dragon kite, and he's able to with lightning, he takes this dragon into the sky and lets it be struck by lightning, and it in turn turns into a real dragon that is able to defeat Angelica's dragon. But she tries to use the power that she already has to threaten the Chinese fleets and the traders that are docked in China. And so in Arak, he tries to go after her, and initially is rebuffed, but he, through some form of guidance from his father, he's able to climb up this waterfall that's basically serving as Angelica's form of transportation, since the dragon that she was using is dead. But there's this really cool set of panels where you literally see Arak physically climbing the waterfall like a cliff, and like you see little bits of water come spouting out of this column wherever Arak's hands and feet are, and it's a really cool series of panels. And so I did like that, and I liked how it's a kind of a reminder of the spiritual forces at work in this world. And but basically, once Angelica and Arak are face to face, they're back on the ground, and the Chinese sorcerer who had helped them, he had earlier shown her this mirror that showed her true self, and it's a very corrupted, demonic looking form of her face. And she has fangs and like a serpent, and it causes her to freak out. And so once Arak and her are back on land, the sorcerer once again shows her the mirror, and through a combination of his sorcery and Angelica's being used against her, she's drawn into the mirror. Basically her demonic self overpowers her real self. And so once she's in the mirror, I mean, she is her demonic self now, that it's been corrupted by the serpents, by the serpent people that she was in the thrall of. And you see her trying to get out of it. And so Arak takes his tomahawk, and smashes the mirror into pieces to where she can never get out. And it's a really cool final shot, and that's in issue 49. And so you get this, while the final, while the battle itself was a little more rushed for my liking, especially with the very abrupt deaths of Haakon and Mulan. I did like the closure that we got in a sense that the threat of Angelica is permanently ended. So that is one plot thread that was wrapped up, and I appreciated that. And plus, in terms of, I guess you could say fantasy and horror, it's just a really neat shot wherein you see the atomic embedded in the ground, and all these shattered mirror shards are around it, and in each one of the shards you see a piece of Angelica's demonic face screaming, and so that was actually pretty cool. Okay, so then you get to issue 50, the last issue of the series, and it's double-sized or giant-sized, and that in itself was pretty cool, because like, hey, it's final issue, it should be bigger than normal. But Arak and his companions, they go from China to Japan. That's where their travels take them, and basically they have they get involved in this civil war between two, I guess you could say, castes of people in Japan, and and they try to stem the bloodshed. But it turns out, though, that one of the castes is under the thrall of this demon in the area, and this sort of armored red demon. But once Arak is able to work with some of the people to set a trap for it, they're able to kill the demon and end its hold on the people, because this whole time they've been trying to leave the island, leave the land that they're on, but the thing is, this demon has been forcing them to attack this other group of people, which take Arak and his companions in, and they're wanting to basically go and massacre this other tribe, or this other group of people, this other caste. But once Arak and his friends, put two and two together and realized that this other caste has been forced by this demon into constantly attacking this other caste, then they decide, okay, kill the demon, then work things out. We don't need to have an all-out massacre here. And so once that's done, this the people who are wanting to stay, they stay, and the people that were been trying to leave this whole time, they leave. But in the process, though, Malazizi informs Arak of this vision that he had, or a sort of a nightmare, in which Carolus Magnus, the king of the Franks, had been appointed to, I believe it was the protector of the Pope of Rome. And so since Valda, the Iron Maiden, who at this point has been Arak's lover for several issues, she had sworn an oath to Carolus Magnus to basically be to accompany him basically wherever he goes for protection. Aside from being ordered by Carolus Magnus himself to accompany Arak on his journeys, Valda, is basically, once Malazizi tells Arak this, Arak tells Valda, and the two of them are at a crossroads because, Arak, he's on a quest to find the last remnants of his tribe, and that's something that he's been trying to do this whole time. And Valda, though, as much as she wants to go with them, she swore an oath, a holy oath, to Carolus Magnus to accompany him. And so once Arak tells her of Malazizi's vision, she realizes that she's going to have to go back to Carolus Magnus, so that she can defend him while he in turn defends the Pope in Rome. And so, Malazizi and Valda, they decide to, go back to where Carolus Magnus is, and Arak and Satyricus, they decide to continue the journey to try and find Arak's people. And that's where, the book and the series itself ends. And so, like I said earlier, I had some mixed feelings on this arc. Not a bad arc in of itself, but because, Arak never found the last remnants of his tribe, and since we, didn't get the final confrontation with, the Serpent People, things are just kind of up in the air. I mean, the most we get of the Serpent People is the fact that Angelica talks about how she's been in league with them this whole time, which is almost like a retcon of her motivations and development in the issues prior, which I kind of I thought it was an interesting twist, and it in turn makes some sense that she used, like, some of the monsters she used were serpent-like in nature, but at the same time, I felt like it sort of took away from some of her power as a character. Like, don't get me wrong, I mean, she was still a good villain, she was still a good definitely still a capable threat to the group, but it's just that prior to this development of her being in league with the Serpent People this whole time, she really came across as someone who was an individual, who had her own power, and yes, she was working with others, but she was never in their thrall. Like, she was the one pulling the strings. And so this little bit, on one hand, it shows just how powerful the Serpent People were, but at the same time, it just feels like, I really feel like it was something that just came out of left field. And as I said with the filler monsters of the week antagonists, if the creative team had a couple more issues to work with, to develop this plot thread, I think that we could have had more development as far as her relationship with the cult of the serpent, or the serpent people. But because we only had a limited amount of time, we have something that just comes out of left field. While it's not an uninteresting development, it is something that is like, wait, what? But at the same time, I did like, their final confrontation. And as I mentioned, I liked how she was kind of done in by her own, evil nature. And I liked, the whole idea of Arak, forever, destroying, whatever means she has of escaping. And she's, damned to, a fate in limbo. So I did like the final, her final fate. In regards to the final issue, I liked how I mean, within the context of the series itself, it's not a bad issue, but because it's the final issue of the series, it's a disappointment. And also, because of the rushed nature, when Arak and his companions are in China in the last couple of issues, I mean, that's something that I would have loved to see more of. I would have loved to see the creative teams, take on, China at this point in history, as well as within the setting. And it would have been cool to have seen, more of Mulan, like would she have gone on to become like a steadfast ally or enemy of the group. And also it would, like I said, with Haakon, I mean, I would have loved to have seen more of interactions with him and Arak, because they were supposed to have a final showdown with one another, but that didn't happen, obviously. And also though, issue 50 is when they're in Japan, and we only get just a brief glimpse of Japan. It's like an island at this point. I mean, I know Japan technically is an island, but I mean, it's we only get a glimpse of it, and it feels like kind of I mean, the threat of the story literally feels like a monster of the week type of threat, much akin to, say, Shiva and the fairy creature in issues 44 and 45 respectively. So while it is a double-sized issue, it still feels like kind of a monster of the week double-sized issue because of the demon that's manipulating things, and that's like the first and last time we see that creature. And I would have liked to have seen more of the cultural aspects of Japan at the time. And the creative team, the art team does a good job of drawing like the architecture and things like that of some of the buildings and some of the wardrobe and what have you. But we only literally get one issue, and the culture there is just briefly touched upon, and basically that's it. And as far as the final page, where Valda and Malazizi go one way and Arak and Satyricus go another. I mean, if this had been say yet just another arc in the series and not the final arc, I mean, this could have opened all sorts of doors. I mean, it would have been interesting seeing the adventures of Valda and Malazizi and the newly appointed role of protectors of the Protector of Rome, because they're protecting they'd be protecting Carolus Magnus. And as we've seen throughout the series, on the times in which there's focus on Valda, whether it be backup issues or individual issues, when the focus is on her, she's a very compelling character. And so I would have liked to have seen her in the court of Rome. That would have been cool. And also at the same time, seeing Arak and Satyricus continuing on, the journey to find Arak's people. I mean, who knows, what, they could have encountered. Who knows, what, mythical, threats or allies they could have come across. And I would have loved to have seen the creative team, do more with, the world that they had yet to explore. And of course, I would have loved to have seen, Arak finally, find the remnants of his tribe, and maybe, they all had like a last stand against the serpent people. I mean, I would have liked to have seen that, but that never happened. In the letter section of the comics, the editorial team and the creative team, they did a good job of keeping the readers abridged of what was going on behind the scenes, and so I liked that. But one of the things that's sad though is that there was a lot of talk of Roy and Dan Thomas, at least, coming back to close the series off properly, like whether it be like as a giant-sized graphic novel, or maybe as a mini series, or even as a straight up novel or two. And the thing is, they were actually working with a young Todd McFarlane. Yes, Todd McFarlane, the guy who created Spawn. They were working with a young Todd McFarlane at the time to do a mini series for Valda the Iron Maiden. And in issue 45, there's actually a really cool pinup of her by Todd McFarlane. I'll show you all real quick here. Bear with me. So this is issue 45. This is the one with the fairy creature. And to be fair, this is probably one of my favorite covers of the series. Sorry, I didn't mean to have that in my face there. This is probably one of my favorite covers of the series, which is ironic because it's it's obviously a filler issue. But that being said, this is the issue not only in which RJM Lofficer takes over on scripting, but this is the one in which we get the pinup of Valda by Todd McFarlane. And here we go. Historical artifact. So this was around the time Todd McFarlane was working on the DC Comics series Infinity Inc., and it was before he went on to work on Spider-Man for Marvel, or Hulk. Sorry, Spider-Man or Hulk for Marvel. So it's really cool, seeing his art style here. And I would have loved to have seen a mini series for Valda, because she's such a cool character. But it would have been really neat to see, Roy and Dan Thomas, handling the writing, and using, Todd McFarlane as the artist. I mean, I would have loved to have seen that, but it never came to pass. I mean, I like to think that, somewhere in some vault, maybe there's some storyboards, or there's some, black and white artwork that Todd McFarlane did for at the least the first issue, but I don't know. Maybe it's, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, at the end where there's all those, there's that big warehouse. But anyway, though, yeah, so I think if I remember correctly, from reading in the letter sections, of the series at this point, Roy and Dan Thomas were also being approached by other people to, do some work on movies. And so I think they even worked on, or at least Roy Thomas at least, was working on Conan the Destroyer at the time. And I'm not, in my opinion, not that good of a movie, but, that was one of the factors as to, I guess, why he never got around to, doing, a final Arak story. But yeah, so I mean, while there's a lot of talk for giving Arak a proper end after the series itself had ended, it never came to pass. I think the closest, we got to say an acknowledgement of Arak's character was, I'm trying to remember if it was All Stars or Infinity Inc., but it was in one of the two series, uh, in which there was a character that was introduced that I don't know if they were a hero or a villain, but they were supposedly descended from Arak, which, I mean, as an idea in and of itself, I mean, I thought it was an interesting idea because, that's sort of, saying that, hey, Arak actually existed in the DC universe proper. But at the same time, though, I think I like the idea better of, Arak just existing as, his own character in his own setting. And yes, even though Arak was a DC comic, they were going out of their way to say that, this is, a whole, separate, setting from anything else in the DC universe. Like, you're not going to see, crossovers with Amethyst or Ambush Bug or anything like that because it's a separate setting. So, yeah, I mean, I think, if I remember correctly, somewhat recently with DC Comics, they somehow brought back Valda, the Iron Maiden, in some of the Wonder Woman books. I don't know what the plot developments are on that. I just know that it recently happened. So I mean, that's definitely interesting to hear. So I don't know if it was any good or not, but yeah, it's just I mean, Arak itself was a good book, but it could have ended so much better. They could have done so much more as far as storytelling and what have you. Or my thing is, the creative team obviously wanted to tell many stories, but they only had a limited amount of time to do it at a certain point. Like, once DC came to them and said, hey guys, we like your book, but it's not selling like it was, when it first started, so we're going to end it at issue 50. They could have been like, okay, we do want to tell these stories, but we need to wrap up the plot thread of Arak finding his people and having this final showdown with the Serpent People. So let's focus on that. So by the time we got to issue 50, if they'd done that, I feel like the series could have ended properly. And so even if we never got, say, an Arak graphic novel in the reality in which that would have happened, or even if we never got a Valda the Iron Maiden miniseries either, at the very least in that reality, we would have had a proper ending to Arak within his own book. But because there was too much focus placed on, I guess, villain stories, or rushed plot development in terms of exploring China and Japan, or reunions with old frenemies, because the focus was on all that, we got the book ending on a cliffhanger. So I'm going to go ahead and give 41 through 50 as a whole. I'm going to go ahead and give the issues, give the arc 3 out of 5 stars. Even though it was a disappointing in the sense that it was the last arc on the series and it left a lot of stuff up in the air, it wasn't a bad arc in general. It just, it could have been better. But I'll go ahead and show you all the cover art real quick. So here's issue 41. Issue 42. By the way, these scorpion creatures, really cool. Even though they're only in one issue, they were a part of the storyline in which Arak is forced to go into the underworld, or he's forced to go on the journey to find the herb of eternal life and then into the underworld. But he encounters these scorpion creatures, and they're a lot more intelligent than you would think. So I mean, like, they're a threat, but at the same time they're not just like mindless monsters. I thought that was pretty cool, but really cool cover though. 43. Yeah, this is where he actually manages to get Valda and Satyricus out of the underworld, and it's where Gilgamesh helps them out. There's 44, where he goes up against this cult of Shiva, and the guy who would be Shiva. And here's the issue 45. I already showed y'all a cover, but here it is again. Like I said, probably one of my favorite covers of the series, even though it's, one of my least favorite actual issues. Okay, issue 46. Definitely my least favorite of the fill-in issues. Issue 47. This is actually a really cool cover, except the way Haakon looks on the inside of the book is very different on how he looks on the outside. And on the inside of the book, he's actually in disguise, like he's wearing this sort of let's just say he looks different. I don't know I don't know the terminology and what have you, but I think they did just on the cover though, just to show readers that, hey, remember the guy from several issues ago? He's back. Still cool cover. And this is issue 48, and like it's showing, this is where they come across Mulan. And I liked the glimpse that we got of her. I thought I would have liked to have seen more of her, But yeah, this definitely is not the Disney version. Issue 49. This is where he has the final showdown with Angelica. And ironically, we get more closure in this, which is the next to final issue, than we do in the actual final issue. So go figure there. And last but not least, issue 50. Last issue of the series. Yeah, so yeah, that was Arak, people. That was Arak, Son of Thunder. I very much enjoyed reading the series. It was a pleasure to, come back into the world, anytime I did for a review, and I just wished it ended better, as a whole. But yeah, thank you for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, let me know. Like what you see here, please subscribe, and y'all have a good night. Bye.